So let's kind of review a little bit about what we talked about yesterday. So yesterday, we said we know because of fossil evidence and DNA evidence and comparing species in various areas that species have changed over time. That they're not fixed in one specific form, that over long periods of time, they can change. The Earth is billions of years old. And that's a long time for species to change. And so, where we left off, we had completed this slide, but let's just review. So how does that happen? How do species change? Well, it happens through a process that we call natural selection. Yeah. Just want to review. So in natural selection, the members of a species that have the best traits, the best characteristics that help them survive, they survive better. And they therefore usually reproduce more. When they reproduce, they pass on these helpful traits to their offspring. And these helpful traits become more common over time. Any traits that are not very helpful tend to decrease over time, because if you have a trait that makes you're a bird and makes you not fly very well, you're probably not going to survive very long. And probably you're not going to be able to reproduce and pass on that gene, that trait that made it harder for you to fly. And so any individuals not well adapted will often die, and over time, many, many generations, this leads to the species changing over time. So when we talk about natural selection, okay, talk about sort of a few important things in how natural selection works. Okay? And the first thing is that in any population, in any species, there's always variation. There's always some variation. Obviously, in your grade of 7th graders, if we were to look around the cafeteria next period, is there a lot of variation in height, in size, in hair color, eye color, skin color, in the length of people's neck or fingers? In all of those things you could think of, there is a lot of variation, a lot of variety. No two people are identical to each other, even identical twins. There's variation. And we notice it amongst fellow humans very easily. You say, we look around, yeah, we don't look anything alike. But other species, squirrels, or maple trees, or mushrooms, they also vary from each other. Even though we may look at a squirrel and say, well, all squirrels, they look exactly the same, they're all identical. But really not. We aren't able to notice the differences as easily, but they're not all the same, they're all different from each other. There's natural variation in all living things. And in nature, sometimes these variations, these differences, is helpful. It's good for that individual. Sometimes a variation may be bad for the individual, may not be helpful, may make their life more difficult. Sometimes they may vary, but it doesn't really affect them either way. Okay? That it's neutral. It doesn't help them, it doesn't hurt them. So we're looking here at these grizzly bears. Are they identical? No. No, there's some variation there, right? What variation is sort of obvious when you look at them? Nick?
The black one?
Yeah, their color of their fur, it varies. It's not all the same. They're not all exactly the same color. Okay? And they vary in their size, or maybe the shape of their ears, or color of their eyes, or all sorts of different things. Okay? So natural selection starts with variation, that there's differences. Each individual in a population is unique and different from each other. We also know in nature there is a constant struggle to survive. Often in nature, there may not be enough food to support every individual in the species. There may not be enough living space. There may not be enough mates. There may not be enough water. There may be predators making survival difficult. There's lots of different factors that make it hard for organisms to survive. And they're not all going to survive. That's nature. They will not all survive. Which ones do? So in a population with variation and a struggle for survival, which individuals in that population of squirrels is going to best be able to survive? Roger?
The ones who are better adapted and
Yeah, what is that? So the ones that are better adapted, what does that mean, better adapted? Vinny?
the ones that are like more like what is it? Like camouflaged in their habitat.
Maybe. Lily, what were you going to say?
Whatever, like what did you say? If there was fit for the environment.
Fit for the environment? Sophia?
Or like another way around would be cute grass.
Okay. It could mean that. It could mean camouflage. But what it means, the best adapted, means whatever traits are helpful in that situation. The individuals that have those traits, they're going to survive better. And you guys are giving me some examples. Sometimes being camouflaged is helpful. Sometimes being smart is helpful. Sometimes being fast. Sometimes being strong. It sort of depends on the situation. Depends on where they live and what the resources are. But they're not all going to survive. The ones that are going to survive are those that are best adapted. They happen to be born with the traits that are helpful. And if they survive, they're more likely to reproduce. So these individuals that have these helpful traits, they can live longer, and therefore they can be more likely to reproduce and have offspring. Individuals that couldn't survive probably couldn't reproduce. What is that? Yeah, what's it in? Yeah, those are all frog eggs. One frog released hundreds of eggs at a time, one female frog. Okay. And all those little dots, each one is one individual egg. Now, are all of those eggs going to survive into adulthood?
No.
No, only a very small percentage of them are going to be able to survive. If all of them did, the stream would just be flooded with frogs, but it's not. Only a small percentage make it. Why? What happens to those? Why don't they all make it to be adult frogs? What are some things? They?
Like predators?
Predators. Eggs are an excellent food source for many different types of predators. Many of these eggs will probably be eaten. What else? What are other things that could happen?
Well, I have a question. Are they like hard eggs? Or
No, they're soft in a jelly-like coating. Olivia?
They could get stepped on.
They could get stepped on. What else? Really?
Maybe they just like die.
They could just die. Some of them may not get fertilized, and they therefore can't grow into a tadpole. Some of them will, though. And when they're tadpoles, again, there's still a struggle, right? Because predators still like to eat tadpoles. Tadpoles then have to go find some food. There may not be enough food for all of them. So if there's not enough food, which ones are going to survive? Sophia? Yeah, maybe the ones that can swim faster get to more of the food. Or maybe the ones that are smarter find food in different places. So we don't really know, but some of them are going to be better suited to that ecosystem. And those are the ones that are going to live and survive. When they do that, they pass on these traits to their offspring. We know that the offspring of parents, whether they're produced sexually or asexually, they're similar to the parents. Not identical, but similar. And so probably, if you have some of these tadpoles that are born and happen to be a little quicker, probably once they grow to adult frogs and reproduce, their young are going to be a little bit quicker. And they're going to have that helpful trait as well. And if you think about this and you continue this and think about it happening after one generation, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 100 or 1,000 generations later, these traits that were helpful, these variations, will become more and more common because they're helping these individuals survive. And so over time, these become adaptations. And an adaptation is a characteristic, a trait that an organism is born with that allows it to survive. Sorry. Now, there's an important distinction that we need to make about adapting, adapted, adaptation. Because oftentimes people get a little confused on this. So if the environment changes in some way, can this frog, this individual frog, adapt to new conditions? Let's say the water level in this stream drops way down. Can this frog then adapt to living in that shallower stream?
No, they'll die.
It'll die. An individual frog, an individual bear, one individual mushroom or plant can't adapt. They are born with whatever genes they have, with whatever characteristics they have. They can't change them. Okay? So one individual can't adapt to changes in its environment. But a whole group, a species, a population, that can adapt over time. Because there's going to be variation within that population. And some will survive better, reproduce more. So a group of individuals can adapt, but not one single individual. An individual is born with whatever characteristics and it cannot change. Evolution happens to groups, not to individuals. One frog, one bear, it can't change its fur color. Okay, it's born with a certain fur color. But can that species of bear, over time, can its fur color change? Yeah, the whole species over a long time can change. But one individual bear is born with whatever fur color, it's going to stay that way. So that's a distinction that sometimes it's hard to remember, or people say it incorrectly a lot of times. People say in evolution, an individual adapts to its environment. No, it doesn't. It either is adapted to its environment or it's not. It can't change. So the term we often use, or the phrase we often use is natural selection is survival of the fittest. Okay, and fittest is an important word to understand. Survival of the fittest means organism that is best what? How am I going to fill this in? The organism that is best adapted, best fit in its ecosystem, do what? Organisms that are most fit will, really? Survive and have. So the ones that are best adapted, that are best fit, will survive and have what? What?
Offspring.
Yeah, and have offspring. Have young. That's what survival of the fittest means. And those offspring probably resemble the parents. And Darwin said this. It's not the strongest of the species that survives. It's not about being strong. It's not about being the smartest even. It's about whichever one is able, whichever species is able to respond to a change. Ecosystems, environments are always changing. Predators change. Climate changes. And if a species can respond to that change by having lots of variation, that will be what survives. So, yeah, let's, this will be our last slide here. So, we just said, look around the cafeteria next period, and we're all very different from each other. There's a lot of variation in our population. The question then is why? Why are we all so different from each other? And where does that variation come from? Well, it really comes from two different things. Variation comes from, first, sexual reproduction. Because when organisms reproduce sexually, there's the mixing of genes from two different parents. And traits get shuffled around. Like we said, you're not identical to your mother or your father. You have a mixture of traits from both parents. You have new combinations. You're a unique individual. You're not identical to your brother or your sister either. You ended up with different genes, you and your brother or your sister. And that's part of what the reason for that is because of sexual reproduction, because we have the mixing of genes. Kind of like shuffling a deck of cards. Each time you do that, you end up with a new combination of cards, a new hand has been dealt. The other part is through what we call mutation. And you probably have the wrong idea of a mutation. You're thinking like X-Men or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So a mutation is not a magical superpower that is acquired. Mutation is something much simpler. When cells are dividing, when cells are reproducing, sometimes a change happens. That in the DNA, which normally would be copied identically, sometimes one of the letters in the DNA gets switched. A mistake is made. If you're copying down the recipe to make some brownies that your friend gave you, you may accidentally write down the amount of an ingredient incorrectly, right? You might make a mistake. Are those brownies going to be the same as the brownies your friend made? No. Could they be better? Maybe. It depends on what the mistake was. Could they be worse? Yeah. Could they be about the same? Yeah. So this is like a mutation. Sometimes a mistake gets made in copying the DNA. And those new cells that are produced, that new organism, that change, it may have made it better adapted. It may have made it worse adapted. I don't know if that makes sense grammatically. Or it may be neutral. It may not really make a difference at all, changing that letter. But it's going to be different. There's going to be variation. Maybe the reason one of those grizzly bears had darker fur is because of a mutation. When the cells that produced that grizzly bear were being produced, one of the letters got changed, and that resulted in darker fur. That resulted in a new variation in those grizzly bears. So variation comes from two places. Sexual reproduction, which shuffles the deck, and variation, which sort of adds new cards to the deck. And when that happens, you get different combinations, new varieties. And over time, tiny little changes can build up. Let's say you copied the brownie recipe wrong, and then you gave it to your friend, and they copied it down. And you did this 1,000 times. When you look at that recipe after 1,000 times, is it going to be the same? No, it could be very, very different. Because along the way, people made little mistakes. Somebody copied a number down wrong. Somebody put teaspoon instead of tablespoon. Okay? And over time, that recipe might be quite different from the recipe that you started with. Okay? Because these little changes build up. And that happens in evolution too. It happens in nature. Generation after generation after generation, tiny changes can result in big changes. And that's what this video clip I want to show you tries to illustrate.